So again, good morning, everyone. I appreciate you coming out to the first CCAPS workshop, faculty development workshop, the first of two. So the second will be in a couple of weeks. But this first workshop on team projects, creating and supporting and assessing group work. So we have four panelists, two of our instructors and two of our university community partners that will be with us today. And I want to give us time to meet our panelists and hear from them a little bit about their background before we jump into some of the questions we have for them. So first person I'd like to introduce is Bill Rosaitis. Bill Rosaitis works over in the Center for Education and Innovation. So Bill, you might tell us a little bit more about you and the work that you do.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. As Tony said, I'm Bill Rosaitis with Center for Educational Innovation. If you haven't heard of us, we're a system-wide resource that supports faculty and instructors in engaged and evidence-based instruction. So I do a variety of things with the center. I direct and also teach in our Preparing Future Faculty program, which is a program for graduate students and postdocs who are expecting to become or hoping to become faculty members. So we do a lot of pedagogy work and so forth, talk a lot about group projects. I also instruct the early career program, which is for junior faculty in their first 5 years. Again, introducing them to evidence-based practices for good instruction and supporting them as they develop their skills. I working with doing a lot with artificial intelligence, particularly ChatGPT and some of the other tools. So we have a sort of a joint a fellowship program with academic technology support services and the university libraries, where we're helping faculty sort of pioneer to the use of these particular tools, and hopefully they'll share that with the university community so we can kind of decide what some of the best practices for using these tools are. And then I do a variety of other things like events like this, workshops, consultations, and so forth. A lot of work with online instruction as well. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Bill. We appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Next up, Ann Lowry. Ann is one of our instructors, and so I'll let Ann tell us a bit about the courses she's teaching, what she does outside the U.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I currently teach an online class for CCAPS, and I'll talk about that a little bit when I do my, my other little gig here. But I've also taught for way too many years and taught a lot of groups and teams classes. So I have experience teaching in-person classes as well, with working with groups and teams. And much of my consulting work over the year has focused around working with teams and team building. And so I've done a lot of work with teams in the for-profit, nonprofit sector as well. I was the team coach for the executive MBA program at Carlson for a while. So got kind of a breadth of experience around different sort of contexts for group work, and certainly could probably write a book on all the stories I have about things that have happened with student groups. But overall, I think it's a great learning experience for students to be in groups, and certainly applicable to the real world. So I'm happy to be here today.
All right, thank you, Ann. Up next is Bill Kenny. Bill Kenny is one of our health service management faculty. And so, Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, my name is Bill Kenny. I'm the instructor for health services management, healthcare administration and management class. It is primarily in the classroom. We obviously were teaching a lot online. There are times that I do teach online just by virtue of everyone's schedule, but mainly we're in the classroom. I've been teaching at the university for 10 years. Prior to that, I taught over at St. Mary's for about 5. My day work is as a CEO of dermatology consultant. So my experience has been primarily in both clinic and hospital administration. And as I'm sure you all know, we do a lot of teamwork in healthcare. And so I try to transfer some of those skills into the classroom. So happy to be here and hoping to learn more than I can probably provide to you.
All right, thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. And finally, Joe Moses. And so, Joe, I'll let you tell a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm a senior lecturer of faculty in writing studies I had planned to be in my office, and I got those messages about the shooter. And so I'm in Starbucks. I hope the background noise is not awful. I teach technical and professional writing in the Department of Writing Studies and project design and development. And thanks to a happy coincidence of teaching those courses in the same semester, combine the idea of project management with writing instruction. And I've been doing this for about 30 years. And in the last 12 years, was invited to collaborate with a senior faculty on some research, writing, publication. And met a graduate student who has turned out to be a co-author on 2 books on collaborative writing, one for instructors and one for students across the curriculum. And so our research has been around classroom collaboration and making that collaborative effort productive and a positive experience in light of many, a wide variety of past experiences that have been both positive and negative. And so I'm really, like Bill, I'm excited to learn about issues of interest and solutions, and also excited and grateful for the opportunity to share what we've learned in the classroom and how it applies to the workplace as well.
All right. Well, thank you and welcome, Joe. And I know many are probably wondering why this first workshop on group work and assessing. And it kind of comes out seeing or hearing the pains of instructors saying, well, this student reached out, they're having issues with their group, or how do I help my group kind of get through the pains of developing and becoming a group and figuring out how to complete their assignments as a unit. And so that's why this came up as our first workshop. And so again, thank the panelists for being here. And so first question I have is, what ideals, values, and or resources influence your thinking about student group or paired work? And I'll throw that out to Anne.
Thanks. I think we could entitle this "The Agony and the Ecstasy." The ecstasy of seeing students work well in a group together and experience true collaboration versus the agony of seeing them struggle. And my probably worst case scenario was one time when students threatened to get a restraining order against one another in a group. But fortunately, that's been more the exception. Probably the thing, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what my class includes for assignments first. I have 2 group assignments. The first one is a team's paper, which is kind of a warm-up activity more than anything else. I don't expect that there's collaborative efforts going on there. Usually it's the one person who takes responsibility and does a lot of the writing, and then they do a lot of, throwing together all these different pieces, even though they're evaluated on having a consistent writing style. Sometimes it looks that way, sometimes it doesn't. So my expectations for that assignment aren't real high, but they do have to go through the process of working in a group, which is, having group meetings, setting up group norms, recording their meetings, letting me watch them, that kind of thing. The second activity, though, is more the one I consider the true collaborative activity, which is a group negotiation. And so I have a Harvard negotiation that they go through where they have, they're split into 2 groups. There are 2 groups that work together, pardon me, and they have to negotiate a resolution to an issue, a contract, basically. And that one I anticipate, or I hope, to be more collaborative. The question that Tony asked was about what value guides me. And, my ultimate value that guides me is collaboration, to get them to collaboration. They're pretty good by the time they get into my class. I have mostly juniors and seniors at knowing how to conquer and divide. You do this, you do this, you do this, we'll put it all together. But if I can get them to actually collaborate, that's my goal. And the team, the negotiation, they really have to sort of collaborate with one another as well as with the other group to get to a good solution. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But my guiding principle would be collaboration over divide and conquer.
Thanks, Ann. Bill, speaking
Yeah.
from the CISA.
Thank
Oh, I
you.
forgot we have two Bills. So go ahead, Bill.
You want me, Bill
Kenny.
Kenny? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we'll go
again,
Bill Kenny, then I'll go Bill Rositis.
and thank you. I like how you set that up. So in my class, we, like I said, it is in the classroom. So from the get-go, our students are assigned to tables. And, you know, I think of when I first started teaching, I wanted to be have some control over that. I just let the chips fall, but have an equal number of students. If somebody drops, we rebalance so that we have, again, equal number of students in each of the table. And these students sit with each other throughout the semester. So they are together and they've got a number of projects that they work on together. The first thing is that they are working on a case study that everybody in the class works on. So there's kind of a comparative opportunity to see how the interpretation of the case study is done among all the groups. And there's a requirement as far as one or two to present the case study. The second is that they have a separate case study, each of them. It's all part of my materials from the book. And they work on that throughout the semester. They are always answering questions after each chapter, trying to apply what they've learned to the case study if it's pertinent. And then finally, they are all required to make a presentation and then present the responses in a consistent format, one submission throughout at the end of the semester. It's our second to last class. I also have what's called Try It, Apply It, which has been a very, I think, effective way of taking content in learnings in concepts from a chapter and then reflecting on that each week. And so there's a writing exercise each week that each student has, but at the beginning of class, we come in for that week and we have group discussions, and then each table has to present what their reflection was collectively. One of the things I try to do from a good facilitation standpoint is when I use because I'm in the classroom, we could do this on Zoom too, is when people are ready, they need to notify that the group is ready, give them a certain amount of time typically, and that they've got to have identified who is going to present so that we don't waste minutes and then, 10 minutes trying to figure that out. And so they get that after a few classes that I don't have a lot of tolerance for waiting around. I try to have them, and this may be more details now, but I do try to have them rotate that. And I'm looking for some kind of method that would help support that. And then finally, I use the boards for them to speak to, because when students get up to present on behalf of their group, they may forget. So they're actively up working on a board and then ready to present with the identified person. So that may be more than you wanted to hear, but that's how I do it.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Bill Rositis.
Yeah. I think one of the things that drives my thinking about group work is that it's really important for the instructor to be involved at every step of the project, whatever it is, whether it's informal or formal group work. I think so often when you hear students having bad experiences with groups, and most of them, when they hear a group project in a class, go, ugh, no. It's because they've been in dysfunctional groups, they didn't work, and generally the instructor says you have something due at the end of the semester, and see ya. And students are left to sort of fend for themselves. So I think it's really important to be present at every step and to really think in terms of how you're breaking out the project and supporting students. Anne mentioned this when she talked about sort of like students, the first thing they do isn't necessarily cooperative or collaborative, but then they build toward that as they go throughout the semester. I think that's a nice way of thinking about it. It's like their engagement and their cooperation might increase. So I think about, we use the term scaffolding, meaning to sort of break things up and sequence an assignment. So you might start out with something like ground rules. In other words, like
Mhm.
students, what are your experiences with group work, bad and good? What makes a good team experience? Students can list those out. Okay, what are our expectations for working together? And then you might have students do a team charter where they say, okay, this is what we expect from each other, right? When we have a meeting, you're going to be on time, right? When we say we're going to get work done, we're going to come and we're going to have it completed before we meet together. And it's going to be done thoughtfully, right? Not just slapped off. There might be opportunities in class for students to check in about how the team's working. And there are all sorts of forms and instruments that can support these kinds of things, like how is the team functioning? How well are we doing? And that as students do various parts of the project, I'm talking now specifically about like more sort of high stakes, larger projects that might take the entire semester. But the faculty member might provide feedback throughout, right, to give students a sense, okay, here's what's working. And I think you have to check in with the teams. How are things going? So I think it's important to be present and to really think in terms of the team project and how you're going to structure it and how it sort of intersects or works with what you're doing in class. The other thing I think that's important, and I've heard this from students over and over and over, is provide time in class for them to get together. Maybe only 5 or 10 minutes, as frequently as you can, but it's so hard for them to have that face-to-face interaction. If you can give them carve out some time in class, that can be really useful. And the last thing I'll say before we turn it over to Joe is I'm going to put a couple resources in the chat for you. One is a CEI resource on teams and group projects. So I'll probably be referring to this throughout. There are lots of great rubrics and example assignments and helpful hints that you can look at, really useful. And then the other one is an article about dealing with groups, making groups into effective teams. And there's some really good advice in that about dealing with dysfunctional groups and trying to support groups that aren't doing really well and some of the strategies you could use. So I'll do that right now.
All right, Bill, thanks for sharing those. 'Cause, yeah, like I said, I'm hearing about the dysfunctional groups more than the good groups. And so thank you for sharing those. Joe.
Hi, my audio is breaking up. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
uh, my three guiding values come from design thinking, agile project management, and principles of collaborative writing to learn. In design thinking, it's a human-centered approach. Many organizations are already familiar with it, and many academics are too. Where there's a concern for writing on the page, but also the writers on the team. And this speaks to points that others have made around, explicit instruction for how to collaborate, rather than saying, here are your teams, go do what you can. The design thinking principles of problem definition and empathy and the others are really helpful in guiding instruction and process for teams to work together to build the trust that they need to collaborate effectively. For agile project management, the three pillars of Scrum are transparency, review, and adaptation. And those fit really well in the writing classroom. Not necessarily in the same terms that Scrum folks write about it in terms of the kinds of expertise that you can muster in the workplace. Teams, students need more structure than, well, they need a lot of structure. In addition to this, an agile framework, there's not as much latitude that we can give. I think I tried in the early days of testing out this idea that agile is, transferable to writing instruction, and took some things pretty literally, and it was not successful because students are students, and rather than experienced experts who have more who can operate more based on their expertise and experience. Students can. Finally, collaborative writing to learn, there's a principle of interdependence that's really important. In terms of your project design, creating projects that are authentically complex is important because one of the things I think Anne mentioned was, perhaps not, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, people who tend to sort of take charge and kind of run with it and hope that others can keep up. In my classes, I try to share leadership rather than to promote classic sort of some definitions of leadership that say, well, take the initiative and, you know, tell people what to do. And if they don't step up, well, then you do the work. That's not something that I find effective in terms of writing instruction. However, if we design for interdependence that says there's so much work that one person does not even want to try to do all the work themselves, then we have a real need for each other, especially during peer review. And I can elaborate on that in another session, but for another question. But all these ideas, there's some overlap there, but in terms of structure, they have guided me towards providing the kind of structure and scaffolding that has really been effective in guiding teamwork.
Thank you, Joe. And my apologies to everyone. If you have any questions, thoughts, challenges, or tips that work for you, please feel free to enter those in the chat. So thank you. Using what we just discussed, what are some strategies for promoting student learning in groups and teams that you currently use and that excite you? We'll start with Bill Kenny.
All right, I'm looking at your questions here because I was prepared. Now you've jumped down, but that's okay. So the strategies for promoting student learning in groups and teams. Well, some of the strategies, I guess in terms of structure, I said from the get-go, you are in this large classroom at Brunick's, but you're with your team and you are, and that's really the group that you're going to work throughout the semester. So there's that. I'd love it if everyone got to know each other and they're in other classes, but it's been really nice to be able to create a smaller environment for people to work throughout the semester. I think that's one of the challenges at the University of Minnesota being so large, is to try to create that sense of a little bit more intimacy and trust. And I think it actually supports the idea of attendance in my classroom. The other thing, a couple other things I do in terms of my structure is I meet with each group early on. So we review assignments that they're doing in a group. They have a lot of assignments, so I try to work on clarity for that. They also have individual assignments, but we share that in what they're finding, learning, or identifying as they're working on their assignments. So one big individual assignment at the end of the semester is to identify, study, and interview a leader in a healthcare organization, and then present that organization, and using the concepts throughout the semester in each of our chapters that we cover to reflect in the paper that's being written. In checking in with the students, I leave it up to them to figure out when they can do it. Requirement, everyone needs to be there. Most of the time that's the case. I give them a lot of latitude in terms of time of day that could work for me, usually evenings, weekends. I can do it during the day if I need to. And then as far as learning, you asked what kind of excites me, that when I get to the point where the students are really trusting one another, they're showing up. If somebody is not coming, that they have identified to the group that they're not going to be in attendance. There seems to be a much better sense of trust that exists within the group. So.
Yeah, thank you. And what about you on this question?
Yeah, I'm not sure this excites me because it causes a lot of headaches, but the negotiation project that I talked about as my second project, students don't actually get graded on the negotiation itself. They get graded only on participation. So I have 100 points in the course, that's 500 points total. So a quarter of their grade is on participation, and it's all peer evaluation. So they and you can set this up online too, to have them do peer evaluation of one another. And so that's how they get evaluated for that particular assignment. And I don't get involved in the grading of their participation, their peers do. And it causes some problems because if they don't participate, they don't get a good grade. And, I've had students who've lost 100 points because they didn't participate in their group. So that's the main strategy I use for encouraging participation. And that the 100 points applies to the first assignment as well, even though they are in different groups for that. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. Are you going to get back to the other question about what structures we use to facilitate it, or? Okay,
Yes.
I'll wait on that one then.
Tony, can I ask
Yes.
a question
Oh, yeah, you can.
of Ann? So this is a struggle that I have in terms of being honest and not because I have a format where there's a grading for group participation, but sometimes the groups are like, oh, well, we're giving everybody 100 points, and how do you and you said you just let it happen. Is there a bias? Is it really objective? That's my struggle.
Honestly, I don't know. There's probably deals that go on behind the scenes, but I think most of the time it's pretty accurate because, if I see, 4 people give a 0 and 1 person give a 5, then I know there's something going on. But
Right.
I think it's pretty accurate. I think people are pretty honest. And I also have a spot on the form where they have to put comments. So, and they'll put, so-and-so was a very active participant, came to group meetings, da, da, da.
Yeah.
I've been surprised at how accurate how accurate it seems to be. And, you can't get around some of that stuff that's going to happen anyway. I mean, they're better at evaluating, the way I look at it, they're better at evaluating each other than I am. So it's at least more accurate than what I would give.
Yeah, and I make sure that they understand that they have to submit because a lack of participation means that you're going to get a 0. I don't know if you do that.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
start at the very beginning of the semester. My first message out to them is that 100 points in this class, a quarter of your grade is based on participation. If you are too busy, you have a terrible schedule this semester, you don't think you can participate in the group, you need to drop the class. And I usually lose 3 or 4 students after that message goes out, and that's good, that's fine. And I reinforce that over and over and over in weekly announcements that, remember, you're getting a participation grade, you have to do that. So it is reinforced over and over again. Yeah.
Thank you. Joe, your thoughts?
And may I ask you to elaborate on what you said about students are better at evaluating each other than you are? Could you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the students, I have them work in their groups and videotape their meetings, and I could go through all of those, I guess, and come up with the group grade, but I also don't know what happens behind the scenes. A lot of students now are using GroupMe, I think, is the app that they use a lot. And, they know more about how a person participates with them than I do. So they're in a better position to make that evaluation.
Yeah, so Joe, anything you want to share as well on strategies for promoting student learning in groups and teams?
Well, I posted in the chat the idea of transparency being a really vital part of a writing environment. The idea of making your thinking visible, being as transparent as you can, being as explicit as you can in your requirements or your expectations of the writing and of the team, defining what you mean by, teamwork or collaboration, is important. If you expect synthesis, for example, defining what you mean by synthesis or what synthesis looks like in your discipline, it is important. I do a lot of work with the Center for Writing and the Writing and Rich Curriculum folks and the Writing Across the Curriculum folks. And one of their mantras really is to make your expectations explicit through models, through instruction. In some courses, it's not as possible as in others to teach people how to write necessarily, but at least providing models and defining some guidelines for what strong collaboration looks like, sounds like. Documenting processes is important so that we invite students to share what their experience is like during the process, what issues they've, what obstacles they hit, going back to Scrum and the stand-up meetings, what have you done? What are you going to do? What obstacles are you facing? That kind of a structure for learning about what your teammates are thinking and feeling contributes to trust building and contributes to that transparency, contributes to greater clarity in terms of who's doing what, reducing redundancy. Not that redundancy is always the wrong thing, but it can be very effective, in fact. However, helping teams be as productive as they can. So that transparency piece is really ties in with this idea of a collaborative writing environment. One other idea is I would go back to interdependence and making building into the project a structure in which students need each other to do the work effectively. So especially I like during peer review, having a long list of questions, more than one person would ever want to address by themselves, so that there's plenty for everyone to do to reach thorough, detailed, and specific peer review.
Thank you. Bill Rositis.
Yeah. So there was some talk in the chat about peer evaluation. And I just draw your attention to the appendix of that article that I put in the chat. There are actually some instruments in there for peer evaluation that I think are pretty good. So if you take a look at those, you'll get a sense of the kinds of things that you might ask students. Pretty specific. So like Anne was saying, it helps sort of it helps overcome this notion of like, oh, everyone was great, right? I mean, you have to justify and you have to say, okay, they were great in which ways, right? I mean, it's not just they were great, but it's like they were on time, they did their work, they listened attentively. So it's broken out. So take a look at those and you can adapt those for your own class. The other,
Well, can I ask, is there a way of, is there a calculation in that? So with as many students as I have, and is there a tool that gives you a result without having to do the calculations? And shaking her head too, so.
You might know more about that, Anne, than I do. I think the instrument that's in the back of that, or in the appendix of that article, was supposed to be a paper instrument, but I imagine there's online tools. Is that what you're thinking, Anne?
Yeah, I just looked at it. There's it's a 1 to 5 scale, and you could just put that in a Google form, use that same format.
Great, thank you.
Right. The other thing is, so most of my teaching right now is online, and we don't need to talk a lot about online group work. It's actually even more challenging, I think, than face-to-face group work because of the distance. But one thing I have found useful is to make sure that roles are assigned. And in particular, roles like project manager. This is the person who gets all the stuff set up. how are we going to communicate? What are we going to use? GroupMe? Are we going to use Google Docs? Are we going to have a Google folder? I'll do that. I'll collect everybody's contact information. That's the conduit or the liaison between their group and me, so that I can contact one person and get a sense of how things are working. And group roles are very flexible depending on what the project is. You could have like a timekeeper or a researcher or the editor or the communicator, whatever. There's lots of different options, but I've found that to be pretty useful. The other thing is, I'll mention this. It's something I don't know that a lot of people are aware of, but there's a strategy called cooperative quizzing, which is a strategy that can actually help teams work together effectively. So we talked about teamwork and having a group come together rather than having individuals like split and do the work on piecemeal and then staple it together and hand it in. Cooperative quizzing, generally, just look it up online, you'll find out descriptions of how it works. But generally, you have a group working on something and you test the individuals first. They get a grade, and then you actually do a version of that same test with the group together, and then their students' final grade for that particular assessment is a combination of those two. So the idea is that every student in the group, even if I'm working on part A, I should know parts B, C, and D as well, right? And this cooperative quizzing is a strategy that can actually help foster that. So it's been used here at the University of Minnesota by different faculty members. I wouldn't say there's a lot of people doing it, but those who have tried it are pretty enthusiastic about it. So just one other strategy. I'll put it in the chat here too. You can look at it if it fits your class. It might be something to consider.
Thanks, Bill. How do group assignments in the classroom connect to other contexts like workplaces or organization settings? And then what competencies, skills, knowledge, and dispositions do students develop through generating work with others as a team? And I'll start with you on this one, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, I shared a link to a slide presentation. And if on one of the slides, number 5, I break out a table of, I was a fellow in the career readiness program and went through a process of really looking for parallels between what happens in the classroom and how it relates to the workplace. And analytical and critical thinking are top of the list. Applied problem solving, and all of these are things that take place during individual writing projects. But I think they're multiplied. The benefits are multiplied because you have that diversity dimension. So that applied problem solving, I know how I solve problems, but I learn how others do it too when I work in teams. Oral and written communication, it's probably obvious. Students are able to engage diversity and really think about ethical reasoning. You've got a built-in sort of test group with your team. One of the principles of writing instruction, of course, is feedback and getting authentic feedback from readers and basically getting reader responses so that you know how people interpret what you write. Well, you have that built-in group with your teams. So the engaging diversity by personal background and by discipline is a powerful outcome in team writing. I mean, there's no question that the parallels are very strong. I think it's important if you're really going to leverage the power of collaboration, the group work. If it's built into the course as much as possible, rather than kind of a one-off assignment. I don't know that there, it moves the needle much, as they say, when it's a one-off short-term collaboration. Whereas if you build some collaborative elements throughout the semester, you realize more benefits.
Thank you, Joe. Ann.
Well, both my assignments, I told you about them before, are pretty applicable to a workplace situation. The first one is really the group paper. You know, people in workplace don't write group papers, but they certainly work on group projects and they write things. So like in a, you know, pharmaceutical research organization, you're writing, I worked in the College of Pharmacy for a long time, you're writing protocols and that kind of thing, and groups do it together. So all the way from people getting, you know, their piece done on time to, you know, nitpicking on words, you know, whatever. I mean, that particular project is pretty applicable to a lot of things that happen in the workplace. And certainly many of you've mentioned group roles and what roles people take. You know, the dysfunctional group member, the challenging group member, the person who talks too much, blah, blah, blah. You know, those kinds of things all come up in team situations. The negotiation is also quite applicable to the workplace because, you know, people do negotiations. And in my negotiation, they have a different country that they're assigned to. And so they take the cultural attributes of the country that they're a part of, and then they negotiate with another group that's from a different culture, a different country. And so they have to do some assessment of the cultural dynamics that come into play and some of the issues associated with that. And that too, given, you know, the world and the role of business right now being very global, is an applicable assignment as well. And that does, you know, I just want to highlight that does really play a role in how groups and teams communicate, not only in the business setting, but also in the classroom setting when we've got students from diverse cultures in our classes. Those cultural backgrounds and those cultural values really do play a role in how they interact with one another, their perception of groups, and how individualistic versus collectivistic attitudes they bring to the class. So that's another piece that comes into play, not something I address in my class, but I certainly have sort of seen it. And I think the question earlier about peer evaluations, some cultures are more collaborative with one another, and I think there's a little bit of larceny going on behind the scenes sometime around that. But again, it's not something I I can control too much. So.
And then Joe asked if you can share the name of the group communication textbook you use.
I will.
All right, thank you. Bill Rosaitis.
Yeah, well, I'll just echo everything that's been said so far. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons to do group work in a college or university is to prepare students to be effective in the workplace. And I think that mentioning that to them in very clear ways, it might be one way to motivate them to take it seriously. In fact, there's a cooperative learning was developed in the 80s with this specific purpose in mind, right? I mean, and in fact, it came out of like engineering education, because engineers very individualistic, right? Very competitive kind of programming. They would come through the programs and they would have the technical skills, but they would get into a workplace and they couldn't actually work together. And so employers were saying, this is a real problem here. We're getting students who, you know, can't function in our workplaces. And so Roger and David Johnson and Carl Smith sort of evolved this process. And it's grown since then. I mean, not that people weren't doing group work before, but so the seeds of this are in a recognition that it's important for students to learn to do this in higher ed so that they can actually apply it in the workplace. So, you know, when you asked about skills, I was listing out, and many of these have been mentioned by other people already, but it's like communication skills, problem solving skills, critical thinking skills, listening, active listening skills, leadership skills, the ability to disagree constructively, right? And like Ann said, negotiation skills. So all of these things I think are byproducts of group work. So yeah, it's important and maybe worth mentioning specifically to students. This is, you're going to need to, you might as well learn to do this now because you're going to be doing it when you move into whatever workplace you move into. So I think that could be important.
Thank you. Bill Kenny.
Yeah, so just to play off that one, Bill, one of the skills is presentation skills, and that opportunity in a group to present on behalf of the group. I actually don't even grade on that, but I give them that experience and set that expectation throughout the semester so that it's not just one person getting up and presenting. So that's, I think, important in terms of valuing the work and giving the students some experience of what they're going to experience in the workplace. All the examples that I'm using in my textbook, which is all geared towards healthcare organizations of many different kinds, are reflected in each week's opportunity to do this. Try it, apply it, exercise or paper. So throughout this semester, not only are they seeing examples of the workplace and then applying it if it's in, planning or culture or decision making, but then also because I have had a career in healthcare management, I'm bringing my variety of experience to the classroom, which is seeming to be a positive in terms of what students report back in terms of their experience. Is that I try to connect each of the concepts each week to what I've experienced throughout my career in the different settings that I've worked in.
All right, thank you. And I think we'll ask one more question before we start moving over into our faculty lounge. And you kind of hit it on already when you mentioned the 100 points for participation, but how do you actually facilitate group conversation?
Okay, since this is my last chance to talk, I want to add one more thing that isn't related to your
Oh,
question,
that's
Tony.
fine.
Sorry.
Yep.
We've talked a lot about, being involved in the groups and providing structure for them. And I want to give just a little bit of a counterpoint on that because groups are systems. And what I have observed over the years is that if I get too involved in their system, in their group work, I become a part of their system. And then we've sort of defeated the whole purpose. So I think as instructors, we always have to kind of walk that fine line between, facilitating the group, but not getting involved in the group and staying away from it. And I have to work on this when I'm consulting too, but that's an important thing too. So there are times when I do let them run kind of wild and messy. And I will push back on them and say, this is your group problem. You have to solve that. And that is very real world. They don't want the big boss coming in to fix them because they don't want the big boss to know there's a problem. So I just wanted to get that little piece in. And then the question was, how do I facilitate conversations? Group conversations? Yeah. I have weekly discussion questions. And so many of their discussion questions, their discussion forums focus around their group, how things are going, their participation in it. They do an analysis of their own participation in it. They also do a voice thread presentation at the end where they have to talk about their group experience. So that's another way. But I facilitate the group conversations through the forums. They have a group site that they can go to talk, and they hardly ever do that. They hardly ever use it. They use GroupMe or they do their own chats. So that's kind of beyond my control. But the main way is through, I think the main thing is through their group forums, and they post, and then they get 6 points for the post, and then they get 2 points for responding. They have to respond to 2 posts. And in the process of doing that, they tend to respond to each other and have, a little bit of a conversation. So I think that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bill Kenny, how do you facilitate?
Well, I'm going to do what Ann just did to just insert something that I've used in my class. And I actually invite the author of our book into the classroom on the first night. And we do that via Zoom. But it's been a real effective way to engage the students in what the intent of this material is and what his desire, I guess, is in presenting this material. And he's been writing, we're now in the 4th edition of this book. It's been really helpful, and he's keeping it very current. So that's been a really helpful tool in terms of introduction to the class, and he talks a lot about group work in healthcare and working as a team. So he supports it from the get-go. And then we do a exercise that is a ground rule exercise, as well as introductions. And then I ask the question, what has your experience been in working with teams? The good, and then the not so good, or what needs to be improved. So those are just some of the things that I've been doing to try to build that from the get-go. And then, like I said, I just keep them in the classroom, of course, setting throughout the semester together. So one other comment is I get a lot of transfer students from the junior college system, and they're overwhelmed by the size of the university and the class size. So we talk about that in each of the groups when I have I usually do a Zoom with each of them early on, and just kind of what their background and experience is. And many times the students are like, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen, you know, and to be able to have that sense of not relating to 40 other students in the classroom, but relating to 6 or 7.
All right.
I don't know if I answered your question, Tony, but.
Yep. We appreciate it.